Welcome back to March to a Million. I'm RJ Malik, and today we are doing something a little different because Greg just dropped a book, not a white paper, not a blog post, a full book. And if you've ever sat across from a financial advisor and walked away feeling like you got a partial answer to a question you didn't even know you were asking, this episode is for you. The book is called The 25 Biggest Retirement Mistakes, and it maps in specific dollar terms the most common and most expensive failures families make in the one financial phase where there is no recovery window. Greg, welcome back. Congratulations on the book. And I have to tell you, I am looking forward to this segment.
RJ, it's so great to be here and have this conversation with you. Back in the day when I started the March to a Million, it's how do I personally go hand-to-hand combat and how do I affect 1 million lives? That's what, has evolved into the podcast with the effort to educate other attorneys on how to do what we're doing. And last year, coming into 2025, I made the decision that, hey, what I've got to do is I got to expand my avenues of communication.
Okay.
And so my team and I have spent a lot of time over the last year developing a library. And the latest version of it is this book here, The 25 Biggest Retirement Mistakes, that we're going to talk about here today. All
right. So before we get into these mistakes, what exactly prompted you to say, I'm going to write a book? Because that's not an easy job. It's time consuming. So why don't you explain how this came about?
Well, in the opportunity that my position gives me, where I have talked to hundreds, if not thousands of families over the last few years in the pursuit of this mission, I kept hearing the same stories over and over and over again. And as technology has evolved, so I've been able to kind of capture those stories as well, to really be able to condense the essence of what I've been hearing over and over again and seeing the patterns. And so that's, when we think about it, the names change, the numbers change, but the same underlying theme has always been there with many of these people. If not most of them, damn near all of them. They've done everything right. They've contributed to their 401k, saved in their IRA. Many of them had an advisor for 20, 25 years. But they came to this point in their life and they felt scared, confused, and didn't understand why. Because they felt like there was something that was disconnecting, but they didn't know why. And these patterns, as I see them over and over, it basically comes from the fact that they've had accumulation plans and they're moving into a new phase of life. And so we chronicle that in these 25 biggest mistakes to help people understand that things are changing and how do they get out of this lack of certainty and get into a world of more clarity and certainty.
Okay, so you are using the word change. That's the heart of the book. So why don't you expand on that?
Yeah, it's a central thesis to what I've seen. Many people that we speak to have not been told that accumulation and distribution are not the same game. We've moved from a phase where we are saving into where we are using, where we've accumulated our bucket, but now we got to use it to support our life. And it's a fundamentally different game when we cross that threshold from being a saver to putting those assets to use. Those first 35 years were phase one, and now phase one is over.
So you're putting real numbers into this book. How does that work?
As we have been able to monitor and chronicle and model what we've seen, we've been able to see what these patterns can cost people. For average families, $1 million to several $1 million, these mistakes that we have seen, cost $300,000 to $700,000 just by not taking advantage of some of the opportunities that are out there, as opposed to purposely making bad decisions.
So let's spend some time on that, with the decisions and with accumulation to distribution. Why don't you sort of outline how that changes?
So first of all, most of the people that we talk to have had a financial advisor. And again, what we're talking about is this change. During that accumulation phase, time is your most valuable asset. A bad year at age 38 doesn't matter because you got another 25 years to recover. And you got compounding that continues to work in your favor if you've got a good advisor. And I'm not saying that most of the people I talk to have had bad advisors. They're just not really the right advisor for this next phase of their life. Because when we are savings, sequence doesn't really matter. When you earn 15% one year and 5% loss the next year, it really doesn't matter. But when you're starting to pull that money out, then volatility is not an inconvenience. It's a threat to your very successful retirement.
Now you're talking about retirement, and volatility is not your friend, but you're saying stay invested, stay the course. Is that sort of the message, one of the messages in your book?
Well, that's this distinguishing difference between phase one accumulation and phase two. Phase one, as we referred to in the book, that's when staying invested does make sense, as long as you've got a well-diversified portfolio. But when you've moved to that next phase, where the accumulation, then staying invested and not having a portfolio that's properly modeled to withstand loss as you're taking it out. So the moment that you stop contributing, the game changes. It now needs a change to preservation and use. And stay invested, that old canard doesn't help you anymore. If the market dropped 35% in the year two of your retirement, and you're using that bucket to support your life, you find yourself in a mathematical death spiral that you can't recover from. Because what many people don't realize, because they've been on the saving side, is if you lose 10%, then you don't need 10% to get back to even. You need to gain 11% to get back to even. And that number gets bigger as you get greater loss. If you lose 50%, you need to get 100% to just get back to even. So the game has fundamentally changed as you move from phase one to phase two. And not recognizing that is perhaps the single biggest mistake people make going into retirement.
So the biggest challenge for you as a financial advisor when you're working with a client who is in the retirement phase, if there is a downturn or when a downturn hits, how you have to really manage not only their money, but manage their mindset, because people could panic when they start to see, their investment declining.
It comes right down to managing a strategy, not so much a person or a portfolio. It's having the right strategy. So if we get back to the volatility question and that issue, if you have two people that have portfolios that over a period of time, call it 15 years, have exactly the same average rate of return, started with the same amount of money that they went in, took the same amount of money per year out of it, but the sequence of returns that generated that average rate of return is different. You have two completely different experiences. And not recognizing that is what really creates the uncertainty. Because that's the phenomenon that leads the marketers of asset management to say you need to have a huge portfolio to support your life, because they need to balance out that volatility. When you recognize that the game has changed and we start doing things a little differently, then you don't need as much capital to support your life.
Okay. In your book, you say you call the 5 years before and after retirement the retirement red zone. Can you explain or expand on that further?
Well, I must admit that, yes, I use that phrase in there, but it's hardly my creation. It was the creation of marketing for many years, right? Talking about the retirement red zone. You're in that zone. But when they did it, being marketers of investments, they're talking about being able to put more money in and those kind of things at that point in time. This is when you got a super fund, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I look at it a little differently. I look at that period of time for many people as the opportunity zone for them to make some tax changes with their saving strategy that can have huge positive implications down the road. Roth conversions at that point in time, developing an income plan that's differently positioned than they probably were thinking about it. Those kind of things during that period of time where perhaps we're at a lower income level than we had been as we were saving all this. And we've got enough time to recoup our investment on paying for the costs of Roth conversions as manifested by additional taxes. So that is a critical period where those type of subtle changes, structural changes, can make huge, huge positive impact for clients.
Okay, you're talking about positive impact, but there's also a possibility of negative impacts or mistakes. So why don't we go over some of the mistakes that people make or should avoid? Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Well, as we were just talking about, let's start with the tax layer, because that's where most money quietly disappears. We label mistake number 9 in the book, ignoring RMD planning. At age 73, the IRS is going to tell people to pull their money out. Some people will be up 75. Who knows what it'll change to in the future? But there is a point in time when the deal with the devil, that was the investment into your 401k, where you got a tax break now, comes back to haunt you. And as I was just talking about, changes during that period of time can really make a difference. If you take a family with $1.5 million in a retirement account when RMD strikes, that's roughly $55,000 that's going to have to come out that first year. And if you didn't need it, then that's just causing this ripple effect throughout your tax structure. Maybe it's increasing the taxable amount of your Social Security. Maybe it's putting you up to another tax bracket. Maybe it's making you end up in IRMA taxes. All these kind of things that have long-lasting impacts. Whereas if they didn't make the mistake of not thinking about that earlier, then they wouldn't have to pay those costs. Because a lot of that can be eliminated through proper tax planning, or at least reduced.
So is it safe to say that you constantly have to pay attention, no matter what age you are, as far as planning for your retirement, and even while you're in retirement, you should still be planning, even, the window that you mentioned between retirement and 73. The income is lower, the opportunity is right there. So you have to really, you really have to pay attention all the time, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, and to tie that back, again, the people that get you here are not necessarily the people that get you near where you need to go. I've got to recognize that with business and things like that. And it's a truism. And we're talking about moving from phase 1, saving our money, to phase 2, using our money. The counseling, the decisions, the skills change from how do I get the most return to how do I structure this so that what I take out is most tax beneficial to me. And when you go to the vast majority of quote unquote financial advisors, there will be a big disclaimer somewhere that says they don't do tax planning. They don't provide tax advice. And that is the biggest risk that people face when they're in that second phase of life, as well as the volatility of their portfolio.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to Social Security. As you say, it's mistake 10, claiming too early. Isn't that different for everybody, or is it basically the same?
This one's near and dear to my heart because this is a mistake that my parents made before I had any education or insight into this. And the die was cast by then. And still too many people say, I'm going to take it because I can, without recognizing the implications. If you claim at 62 instead of waiting till 70, that locks in roughly a 30% loss for the rest of your life. Now, there is all kinds of math that can be done, mental gymnastics that can be done to justify it, but all that flies in the face of science. And by that, I mean right now where we are, the probability is that somebody that is heading into retirement is going to live a lot longer than they think they will.
Yes.
And the longer you live, the more damaging that decision to take Social Security earlier versus later is. And going back to our retirement red zone 5-year window, sometimes it makes a lot more sense to start using some of that IRA money to buy a little bit of time, let that Social Security continue to grow, and receive tax-preferred money for the rest of your life and then for your spouse.
My father made that mistake. He claimed at 62. Part of the reason is because all the men on his side of the family, they didn't make it to 70, or most of them didn't make it to 70. He, in fact, told me when he turned 65, he said, I'm happy I made it to 65. He ended up living to 87. So not a major issue, but, my mom has to be a little more careful where she's at right now.
You're sharing a personal story. I'll share my story on that. That my dad did the same thing, not because of age, but although he did have, a widowmaker early on in his life that he thought he was going to have another heart attack and pass away. So let's get mine while I can.
Mm-hmm.
But he took it early. He didn't need to. And as he got older, my mom and my father, we have 7 kids. Their legacy was our 7, all healthy and happy, and et cetera, et cetera. But he wanted to leave something more. And to his dying day, one of the things that bothered him was the fact that he had to lean on us 7 kids to supplement their income. And that gap that we made up wasn't huge. We all did it happily.
Sure.
But that gap would have been closed had he not taken Social Security early. And he would have been able to not have to, swallow his pride like he had to, and take from his kids in his passing years.
Well, I have to say, I know I learned from my dad and what he did, and I'm sure you learned from your dad and how he approached things. And so from that standpoint, I look at it and say, well, okay, I bet I may not have benefited monetarily immediately, but I will benefit later on from the lesson I learned from him. And I think you probably feel the same way.
Little humility never hurt anybody.
All right. Let's talk about the estate side, mistakes 19 through 22, because I think a lot of people assume they've handled this. They have a will, so they're fine. I fall into that category.
RJ, having a will is just the beginning. It's not the end. And mistake number 20, as we outline in the book, catches a lot of people. Beneficiary designations on retirement accounts and life insurance accounts not being adequately or accurately reflective of what we want to have happen. What people don't understand is that those designations control what happened with the money. A will doesn't control what happens with the money. A trust doesn't control what happens with the money unless it happens to be the beneficiary. And the state doesn't matter who the heck it is that's receiving it. The contract with the insurance company or the retirement country controls. And if there is nobody named, then guess what? It's going to go to probate. My law office just took in another one of those cases just the other day where everybody thought that everything was taken care of, but there was a big old IRA, 401k, whichever one it was, I can't recall exactly, that didn't have a beneficiary. So now hi ho, it's off to probate we go, where my office will make a good chunk of money as the legal team to try to process that. That didn't have to be incurred by the family.
Interesting. Okay. Because you got me thinking about our situation. I mean, there's 4 kids, and my parents made the will, and everything is divided evenly. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's not a lot of money, basically, but there is a property that we'll have to deal with, and that's it. So since it's less complicated, am I in a better situation, or do I need to look at hiring someone else besides the fact that we have a will?
So understand the following based upon that scenario. For a will to have any impact, by law, the assets have to go through probate. So what that means is de facto, your family's facing call it 6% loss off the rip that they don't have to face. And using trust can get around that. Sometimes people get a little clever and do a deed to, call it the four of you. Some do what's called a transfer upon death to, again, say the four of you. But herein lies the rub on those tools, that when they pass away, that real estate doesn't just go to the four of you. It goes to the four of you and four spouses. All have a legal interest in it. And if any one of those thinks that, hey, you guys are not asking for enough money for this, or what have you, or if any one of those 8 people have problems with taxes or something like that, that all gets thrown into the mix.
Okay. Let's move on. Mistake 23 is, I've heard you talk about this in the past. No guaranteed income floor. Expand.
As I mentioned in passing, part of the marketing of the financial industrial complex, has been, you need to accumulate this pot of money, because you need to have a big pot of money to absorb the volatility of the market and still have the ability to kick off income. They've talked about the 4% rule, right? We've talked about that before on this podcast, where studies have shown that, if you take 4% out, then, you got a 95% chance, blah, 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 of not outliving your money. Well, that's because there's no guaranteed income floor. If you throw an income floor on there to meet your needs, or heck, if you want to have it meet your needs and your extravagances, that certainty that brings in, using an insurance company with the annuity providing a private pension, that floor drastically reduces the amount of money that you need to have accumulated, and drastically increases the probability that you'll not outlive your money, and guarantees that you'll never outlive your income. So when we think about things differently, in other words, we go from accumulation, how much can I earn, to I've got this bucket, how much can it generate? That guaranteed income floor helps many people sleep at night.
All right. After the 25, you added 6 more. And you said these are the ones hiding in plain sight because they don't live inside the portfolio or the tax return. They live inside the advisory relationship itself. Explain that.
Well, these are the structural failures. The common one, and I believe the most expensive one on the list, is that there's no financial quarterback that is overseeing this transition from accumulation to use and developing those strategies. The investment advisor is optimizing portfolio. CPAs file the accurate returns throughout the earnings years. The estate planning attorney has maybe drawn a will that's appropriate. Insurance agent has put the policies in place, but nobody has looked at all that from a strategic level and saying, this is how all these pieces fit together, and how these little subtle changes can make a huge difference. That's the structural failure that the financial industrial complex has created for many.
Let's talk about the gap between having advisors and having a coordinated strategy.
As we've talked about a couple times already, because this is the core of my argument with regard to where we are and what members of WSN need to do is, people have had, shall we say, haphazard decisions and not an overriding strategy. And when we have advisors, again, we can have an investment advisor, an insurance advisor, whatever, but once we have a coordinated strategy, we can make trade-offs between one and the other. And many times those trade-offs are what differentiates a retirement that we're comfortable, we're confident, and we're living the life we want, and a retirement where we are watching the market, watching what's happening in the Middle East, worried about tomorrow, worried about a year from now. And the byproduct of that, not only is that worry, because there's no coordination, ultimately, many times, the actual beneficiary of that is the IRS or the healthcare system or the financial industrial complex that is just charging you fees after fees after fees. There's someone at every planning gap collecting in the default of implementing an accurate strategy.
So you start your book with mistakes. Two parties benefit from every retirement mistake you make. So you sort of touched on that. Can you further expand on it?
Well, when you take a step back and you look at who benefits from the lack of strategy, there are two primary beneficiaries, as I just mentioned, Wall Street and Uncle Sam. And not because there's some grand conspiracy or anything like that, but because the system has been deliberately designed to extract maximum value from default behavior. You think about the 401k, the IRA. We've talked in this conversation before about people over relying upon the 401k, taking that small tax break now and creating this tax problem down the road. Who benefits from that? The Fidelities, the Vanguards of this world, who make their masses off of managing and collecting fees on 401ks. And because that is all there in that taxable bucket, Uncle Sam's waiting for it.
They're always waiting for it. It's crazy.
So the family that never looks beneath the surface ends up paying the most. The family that builds a deliberate strategy around these layers pays what they legally owe and not a dollar more.
Well, I mean, if someone else is listening, because I'm picked up on this, what you've described, some of the things I have to, do myself, and I also have to watch for my mom on this. So what's the first thing a person listening should do if they recognize some of the things you've described? What should they do?
Take a step back and conduct an honest self-diagnosis. That's why we wrote this book, to try to help more people make good decisions. The book has a quiz to go through, as it were, to help you assess how you stand. Of these 31 mistakes actually that we have in there, how many of them exist in your current plan? Not how many have you heard of, right? But how many are in your plan? How many can you not confirm are part of your plan? Have you checked your beneficiary designations recently, right? Do we know that that's not a problem? So taking a step back and doing that honest self-assessment. And if you've never been walked through a structured review like that, then do yourself a favor, grab the book and walk through it.
And the book walks you through all of that.
Yeah. The book's a map.
Okay.
And we've also built a retirement risk assessment for families who want to go further. Diagnostic conversation organized around our proprietary pilot process that shows you exactly where your plan's strong and where it's exposed.
Where can people get the book?
So they can go to Amazon. They are all available on Amazon, but the Clarity Library, as we call it, the Biggest Mistakes book, the Probate Tax Trap, the Retirement Tax Trap, and the long-term tax trap. Those are all available again at Amazon, but you can also go to my primary website, www.gsdupont.com, and order through there. And don't forget the March to a Million book as well, that chronicles stories of families across the country that we've worked with, that have seen the light and made some changes in their strategies and the impact.
All right, the Retirement Clarity Series, all of it is on Amazon. Greg, this is a big deal. Lots of great information. I appreciate it, and thanks for sharing it with us today.
Thank you for allowing me to share, RJ. Take care.